So it's my pleasure to introduce Paul Goldberg, who is well known to us here at the School of Architecture as both a teacher and lecturer. A graduate of Yale College, class of 1972, he is now the architecture critic for The New Yorker, where since 1997 he has written the legendary Skyline column. He is the author of numerous books, most recently Why Architecture Matters, published by Yale University Press in 2009. He holds the Joseph Urban Chair in Design and Architecture at the New School and previously was Dean of the Parsons School of Design. Paul Goldberg was himself a participant in the previous symposium, Constructing the Ineffable, and he concluded that event with these words: "I would like to believe that the very idea of the transcendent can in itself become a kind of common language that joins architectural and religious experience, seeing them not as the same, but each of them as something that can enrich the other and that can bring the transcendent to a new level of meaning." Please join me in welcoming Paul Goldberg.
Thank you very much, Carla. Let me introduce the final section of this two-day symposium by saying it's an honor to participate again in what now seems to be an ongoing collaboration between the School of Architecture and the Divinity School and the Institute of Sacred Music, and now the Yale Center for Middle East Studies as an additional partner. As with that important symposium from 2007, the moving force behind this one too is Carla Britain, and we're all in her debt. And also, like the 2007 symposium, I think it's clear that this event will bear fruit for a long time after these 2 days in New Haven. And the issues here have a certain urgency that was absent in 2007, when the broad topic of sacred space allowed us to explore architecture from what could almost be considered a philosophical perspective. Now, with the focus on the Middle East, there is no such luxury. As Carla said in her stimulating introduction yesterday, this could not come at a more opportune time given the debates surrounding the proposed Islamic Center in Lower Manhattan, or the Swiss referendum on minarets, or the interreligious tensions within Middle Eastern cities themselves, all leading to the possibility, as Jürgen Habermas has suggested, that despite increasing modernity, technology, and wealth, we're nonetheless in what might be called not a secular, but a post-secular age. Peter Eisenman's observations about the evolution of Parsifal productions notwithstanding. Whether or not this is true, immediate political issues hover over everything that's been said, and it's difficult for anyone to discuss the issue of religious sites in the Middle East without having some political element be implicit. So politically charged is this subject that when this architecture is discussed in a non-political context, no matter how compelling, we tend to wonder why. While Mohammed al-Assad has argued forcefully for a dichotomy between religious architecture and religion itself, making the point that the surge of what Nasser Rabat has called religiously inclined monoculturalism in the Middle East has simply employed architecture to functional ends rather than using it in a meaningful way to enhance and deepen cultural, not to say urban identity. I'm not entirely sure that this is so, and that these two things, religion and the architecture that houses it, can ever be fully disconnected. While architecture is not the driving force for most of the fundamentalists who represent the surge in religious practice, who are motivated by things other than the making of buildings, the houses of worship that they build are still key vehicles of support for that surge, and they're taken by the world as a symbol of religion's growing power in this part of the world. Indeed, the most concrete symbol of this power that there could possibly be. As Nasser Rabat has said, religious architecture has become a tool used for political as much as religious ends, a phenomenon that the makers of this architecture don't always admit to, but which their political opponents, in such situations as the Swiss ban on minarets or the attempt to block the construction of the Islamic Center in Lower Manhattan, surely understand all too well. In other words, even if this architecture is not intended by its builders to be political, its opponents will make it so. But then again, it's a mistake to think of this as wholly of our time and solely a phenomenon of the Middle East. The Gothic cathedrals of Europe could surely be described as having a political as well as a religious subtext of being built not just to express the majesty of God, but also the power of the church itself, an earthly and always a political institution. The Europeans have been familiar with the use of sacred architecture for political ends for centuries. The historical anomaly, in fact, is really the way religious architecture is not as central to political events today in most of the West as it once was. But now let me move the discussion back to where it belongs by introducing our final speaker, one of the most distinguished architects of our time, Abdel-Wahed el-Wakil. He is perhaps the greatest builder of mosques in our age, an avowed traditionalist whose profound and passionate commitment to Islamic architecture of the past does not come at the expense of cultural enlightenment of the present. Abdel-Wahed el-Wakil is important not because he lives in the past, but because he is so fully a man of the 21st century. His goal is to prove that traditional architecture can be meaningful in contemporary life, not a device to take us away from contemporary life. When he won the Driehaus Prize in 2009, the International Prize for Achievement in Traditional Architecture that Dean Stern will be receiving this year, he was the first architect outside of the European classical tradition to win it. The Driehaus jury referred to his work as, quote, at once classical, beautiful, and sustainable, honoring his heritage both in design and construction techniques, advancing that tradition through his own ideas and ideals, and contributing to a built environment that not only will itself endure, but that will help the planet survive. It was particularly notable that the jury emphasized the sustainable elements in his work, as well as his commitment to integrating the highest standards of traditional craftsmanship with contemporary technology. His oeuvre is not limited to mosques. He's designed houses and academic buildings as well, and not long ago completed the Center for Islamic Studies at Oxford University, which presented the extraordinary and subtle challenge of integrating traditional Islamic architecture with traditional Western architecture of Oxford. He's also at work in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Lebanon, expanding his reach into the realm of government buildings. I'm delighted to welcome Professor El-Wakil TL. We'll begin this conversation with just a couple of minutes of slides that will be gone through very quickly to offer a brief introduction to his work, after which then we'll bring the lights back up and begin a conversation. Thank you. Okay. Okay, we can have the lights back up. Thank you. Okay. Please, please. Mhm. Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much for starting us off that way. Let me start you off by asking a very, very simple question, which I know you will not give me a simple answer to, which is, why do it this way? I mean, why in the 21st century do you want not only to build buildings that are traditional in style, in design, but traditional in the way they're made?
That's a difficult question, but you know, I'm trained as an architect, but I try to find meaning to what was happening in our turmoil Middle East. You know, everything's going wrong there. Politics, thinking, everything's, and I try to see it through philosophy, and the question you're asking was answered by maybe Plato.
Okay.
And there was a book, Why Plato Banished the Artist from the Republic. And it was because of unwanted, unwarranted innovation. And the biggest problem today we have with when I go to universities and students, they force the student to be successful if he is original or innovative. And original does not mean what it really means, going back to origin. It means being different.
Right. It has come to mean that.
Yeah.
Right, right.
And creative doesn't mean that he follows the order of creation, which is nature, and that is what traditional and sacred art used to do. But creative means that he can go psychedelic. You know, that he can twist buildings. And I see this today, and especially with computers now. They take a cube like this and twist it. And then they bend it like this. Computer form Z or whatever, or
right.
a rhinoceros. And the architects my age or whatever, most of them, they don't even handle computers, and they come and they see these shapes that, yeah, let's make a high-rise out of it. And you have in Dubai, there was those twisted buildings. I call them the belly dancing towers.
Yes, right, right.
They are twisted and going like this, and so this is.
So in a way, are you saying that that we do these things, or some people do these things because they can, and because it's become too easy?
They do this thing because basically of the disease of modern. You have to realize we're in a sick society. And one of the diseases we have today is that of ego. Everybody wants to be an individual. Architecture is an individual building. You don't have this collective view that you had before in traditional cities, where you walk in the old streets of Cairo, and there's nobody saying, hey, look, I am... I won't mention names today.
You mentioned a few quite readily before we started. Okay. Well,
I am Corbusier.
but so in a way, I mean, are you making an argument for urbanism more than an argument for style?
Urbanism is very important, and also the geometry of space, the mathematics. Right. All right. You talk of the Transcendent now, you're in your book, and this is picked because this is one subject I really concerned about, how the Transcendent comes to us. In sacred art, form is a reflection of what is unseen, untangible. It tries to express, it's like the shell of a kernel. And every form has repercussions on our society and our community and on our minds. So if you have bad music, it can affect, and today there's books, they say Mozart, you know, is very good for children.
Right.
John Sebastian Bach, Flowers Grow Better. Because we have yes, they used to make fun of the Prince of Wales that he talks to his flowers. He was the first to introduce organic organic farming. And now you go into all the Tesco and all the supermarkets, and and here you have Whole Food.
It's all organic,
it's
right.
becoming, yeah, but when they made fun of him and he talks to his flowers and made a crazy person out of him. But we are now with science realizing all this mythology that people thought are crazy is coming out with science today. There is certain vibrations, and these vibrations affect everybody. And forms, bad forms are damaging. Rock music, there's always violence in it in the concerts. You don't find this when you go to a classic concert. They found these colors. Red color agitates, blue colors calm you down, and green. So in tradition, the people, the alchemists, knew these things, knew about these materials, knew about these colors. So the artist was not doing a painting or something to please you. He was there to tell a story and introduce knowledge. He was not talking to your sentiments.
To instruct.
Yeah, it is not hedonistic, tantalizing, but it was really trying to reach your intelligence. And this is where architecture is very important.
But let me interrupt you and say, a moment ago we were talking about the transcendent.
Yes.
Isn't the transcendent something that goes beyond intelligence, that touches us emotionally in a way beyond
Yes, you're quite right.
facts? Okay.
It's called the super intellect.
Okay.
It is that knowledge that comes by revelation.
Mm-hmm.
Whether one moment of revelation is worth 1,000 years of empirical knowledge or whatever you're trying to reach. Mm-hmm. And this is what artists do not realize today, because they talk of genius and they don't know the meaning of the word genius. We lost the connection between language and what it means. This is why we lost the sacred. Since the 15th century, the worst society in the world, the worst period, is from the 15th century, because it's the first civilization that's building purely on material without a sacred. Now, sacred and transcendent is very different from religion, because what we've seen this 2 days about the mosques, and I had this Camel cigarettes.
Right.
This twisted hilal has become the norm in all the mosques now. This is the inspiration of all the people who build mosques. Forget the original, how do you say, designer, luxury designer projects for the ruler and the grand mosque and so on. But how many millions of mosques are being built today? And each one is more ugly than the other. We saw some Lebanese ones from Assad's work, where they have towers, and all the hilals now are twisted like that, like the cow that went over the moon. And the original hilal is a closed one, and with two circles. The inner circle and the outer circle were in the golden proportion, because this golden proportion is a secret that, you see, the intelligence is putting all this knowledge in the design. When they started to talk of art as aesthetics, they said the golden proportion, the artists use it because it's pleasing to the eye, but they don't know the secret about the sacred rectangle and the sacred triangle. The sacred rectangle is the beginning of polarization, where the one becomes into division, multiple. It's the unity into multiplicity. And the planets and the plants and everything relate to this. It is not just pleasing to the eye, it is part of our creation.
So you mean it reaches us on a deeper level than
Of
just
course,
the eye?
they made tests psychologically. They show people a lot of rectangles. Most of them choose the golden section. And because all this is embedded in us, Our world is a reflection of we are made in the image. We are viceroys of God. We are made we are very sacred in nature. We are the only animals that can talk, that can evaluate, that can make have a free will to make decisions of bad and good. So we have a sacred character inside of us, and people have lost it for 400 years. So it's very difficult to sit and explain to people when people think that, oh, we have to make something new, we can't repeat everything. Who is repeating? I can show you, I can live a whole lifetime just investigating the variety of stalactites,
Right.
the variety of shapes. I made about 20 mosques, not one minaret is the same as the other, but it's all within the tradition. And people who do not work the tradition do not know the subtleties of shades that there are in a tradition. Because this is the mastery.
It seems to me as if actually, and I say this not to flatter you, but just because it seems to be true as I look at the work, that it is as creative as any other architecture, but you're just doing it working within a much more prescribed framework of vocabulary and structure, sort of the way one can write a sonnet in the English language and follow the rules of sonnet writing and still be creative. One can also copy Shakespeare and not be so creative. I mean, just the process of varying within a vocabulary is itself a creative process, is what you're saying.
The real expression in every art can never happen without having boundaries and restrictions.
Yeah.
Art can only be produced when you have limits, and if you don't have, anything can happen.
Right.
But it's like language. You have a vocabulary, you have syntax, you have understanding what a metaphor is, what this is. Now, imagine when architects today are doing designs, they don't even know what geometry is. It took me 15 years because of Hassan Fatih. He said, you think you're an architect, go and do the muqarnas of Sultan Hassan. It took me 15 years we didn't have books in Egypt at the time. We didn't have all this. It took me 15 years to sit and work out how the geometry was working. And it was thanks to one page of one detail of a small muqarnas that was done by Ekoshar, who did the measured drawings of the hammamat of Damascus, that it was like discovering it. And to do the muqarnas of the King Saud Mosque, it took me 5 months in the office, just working on it. In fact, I hate firing people. When I wanted to fire somebody in the office, I tell him, do a muqarnas. He'd give in his resignation after a few weeks. This is because they don't know the geometry. I mean, one person who teaches geometry beautifully is Keith Critchlow. And you have a very good book here in America produced by Inner Wisdoms from New York, Robert Lawler, Sacred Geometry. And people have to get to know this, because sacred geometry and sacred art has an intelligence in it. And that is why the crafts are important to me. The crafts are important because all that knowledge of the transcendental and the theology and the metaphysics and all the spiritual flowering of the society is carried within the crafts. It's the vehicle by which the tradition preserves all this knowledge. I can decipher certain things from looking at pharaonic buildings. And the pharaohs, when Plato said reference to art that is proper, he talked about canonical art. So I'm working on a canonical architecture also, within the limits of what has been created within the tradition. But he referred to Egyptian art because there was no whims of the artist. And when you see the tradition got lost, you see all this stupid art that came out later on in the Greek period. And you could see the statues and everything became sort of realistic. There was no more stylization. But in the pharaonic art, every move, every color, if the hand was like this, it was receiving. If it was this, it was blessing, like the Pope. So every movement, if it was like that, the way the body was shown in 2 dimensions, there was no 3 dimension, 3 dimension in painting, the perspective only introduced with the Renaissance.
Right.
It didn't exist in any traditional art because people did not realize at the time that they can have the illusion of a 3-dimensional image on a 2-dimensional plane. They reserved it for sculpture. They weren't concerned with illusion. They weren't concerned with playing with the eye. They were concerned with transmitting truth. So through it was iconographic.
Right. No, I understand that.
Yeah.
It seems to me that as if you just dismissed sort of Renaissance painting as a violation of the appropriate traditions of art.
I have, like when you erase lines in your drawings and so on, I'm erasing the whole period after the medieval.
I mean, it seems to me it's one thing to take issue with Zaha Hadid, and it's quite another to dismiss Leonardo da Vinci. I think it's sort of no.
No. No.
Okay.
Excuse me.
Okay.
Excuse me.
I missed
True
something.
genius will always
Okay.
exist
Okay.
in bad times and in good times.
Okay.
It's
Okay.
like today in politics.
Yeah.
There will always be good people in government.
Well, one hopes. Yeah.
Sometimes they get killed, but still they come out.
Yeah.
There is always, because good will always dominate evil. But in ages, you have a time where evil is overflowing. And it is our job as educators to bring that back. And the university, the academic, is very important in that sense, because to bring that back, people have to understand not only philosophy, but they have to understand a theology, and that what is important in this world. So Leonardo da Vinci was a genius. Goethe is another genius. Jose Ortega y Gasset, another genius. There are many geniuses. But when we talk of, there are beautiful mosques being done. There are great architects today. People get surprised when I say I love the Mies van der Rohe. You traditionalists, how do you love me? He was a great craftsman.
Yes.
And the proof is that Mies van der Rohe's architecture became the popular one.
In its debased form, it became the popular one.
Yeah,
Yes,
it became, okay,
It's
in the right word to use in English, vulgar, meaning of the people. It was vulgarized.
Yes, it was vulgarized. Exactly.
All right, it was vulgarized. But Mies van der Rohe, when I took an analysis of, you remember Peter Blake when he wrote this book, The Three Great Masters?
Yes.
And at the beginning, he had another book also when they had this big debate at the beginning of the century. It was his first book he wrote. And the last book he wrote, Form Follows Fiasco, because somebody told him, you have to admit that the modern movement is all disappointing and disillusioned with it. But when he did this as student, and we did this, and when I grew up, I tried to analyze. I asked people, okay, we always learned form, function, and utility. And I'd say, okay, who is the formalist? And people would say Frank Lloyd Wright, for example. I said, no, Frank Lloyd Wright is not the formalist. The formalist was Corbusier. What is Frank Lloyd Wright? He's the structuralist. What is Mies van der Rohe? He's the utilitarian. Form follows function. So how do they end up? Frank Lloyd Wright, structure, ends up in nature, because nature is based on structure. Nature structures. That's how nature works. the branching of trees, the flower, it's all structured. Corbusier ends up in France, the artist. And the poor guy, at the end, when he was very disappointed with Chandigarh, and his colleague told him, maybe if you put a sculpture, it will correct everything. That was missing, and he put that hand up there.
Yeah, yeah.
So, and you have
Mies?
Mies van der Rohe. He ended up where he was concerned with detail. He ended up in Detroit. You see, and production. Mies van der Rohe was the Henry Ford of architecture. He wanted to produce an elevation in 24 hours to build it, erect it in a building. He had this, I mean, it's not that they were
I think most clients would say Mies van der Rohe was the Rolls-Royce of architecture, not the Henry Ford. No, I mean, given the expense and deliberate and handmade quality of his work.
Henry Ford is not that bad, but T. Ford was a good
it's
car
very
for
good.
America.
That's true. That's true.
But anyhow, anyhow, Mies van der Rohe became the convention. And his ideas to build the glass elevation, the multi, you know, he was interpreting his time perfectly, and he was doing it. He was a fanatic about detail.
Yes.
And he was a perfectionist, and in that sense, he was not only the Rolls-Royce maybe, but I prefer the Porsche.
Fine.
Because I went to the factory of Porsche, and I told the guy,
you that, yes.
What about mistakes? And he said, we don't allow mistakes here. The German guy. I said, my God, I wish somebody could say that in Egypt. We don't allow mistakes here.
While we're talking about great modern architects, let me come back to this whole question of transcendence and ask you to talk a little bit more about sacred geometry and why you consider it essential as a creator or as a progenitor of transcendence in architecture. I mean, what about Le Corbusier and the concept of ineffable space, the phrase he used to describe Ronchamp, but which has been appropriately taken often to explain the goals of an enormous amount of religious architecture, the creating of space that has a mysterious quality to it that we cannot fully understand, and of sort of revealing the sacred or bringing someone to a point of transcendence that way rather than in the clarity of geometry.
Yes.
Can you?
Yes, you're quite right, because in order for an art to be sacred, one of the main elements is what you just said, mystery. And the medieval city had a mystery.
Right.
Behind every door there was a courtyard, there was a garden. When you walk in, I regret that as a young man I couldn't travel that easily. You know, this world of us with visas and this and so on, it's all the facility we have with aeroplanes and airports and everything, but we can't go to another country because of restrictions of entry. And I went to Iran, and I went to Tehran, and I went to Isfahan, and then I saw Isfahan, and I said, my God, this is the model for the Arab city. Why is nobody looking at it? Why in Qatar today we have a city that is like a debased, deserted Manhattan. Manhattan is more medieval than any modern city. I've lived in Manhattan. I love it because it's medieval in character. You can walk. You can find shops in the streets, but it's a great city, and it's a mixture of people. It's amazing. Manhattan is a live medieval city. Compare it to any other city in America, and it's dead compared to Manhattan. Houston, that city, the center, it's not like Manhattan.
Right.
So what makes this life, what makes this medieval city In the medieval city, you had the mystery. You go alleys, courtyards, gardens. Now you have the cities is just a row of roads, each one like the other. This is what we have today and we leave all this, and then we come to that one individual building. Oh, look at this Norman Foster building, or that. What's this nonsense? Why all this ego?
Not to be too specific or anything.
No, I'm not saying Foster is a great architect. No,
Right.
Don't confuse me. He's a great. I have great respect for Norman Foster, and has great respect for my work. And he trained in the Royal Air Force, so he's a very technical man, good with details, everything. I'm not complaining about Norman. I'm complaining about the people who are making idols today,
Right.
because they have lost their contact with God. So they make idols of movie stars, of singers. Idolatry is always in history, even in Egypt, when they started to have statues and idolatry, but Egypt was the first monotheistic religion in the world. But it's the decadence of each generation when it loses the transcendent, which you're trying to say how we can keep in touch with the transcendent. And this is where sacred art has its mission, by introducing in the forms this total vibration and contact with the transcendent. Otherwise you lose it, and then you have this chaos that's happening in the world today. Why some scientists might find out later on that all the trouble we're having this is because of bad forms. It's like the Christians discovered that in China they were killing them, the missionaries, not because they were Christians, because they designed the roof without the uplift, so they were bringing devils down into the earth. They didn't realize the symbolism of the roof being, it's like they have this forest where evil spirits diffuse, and they have the bent entrance, which we have also in Islamic architecture. So maybe all that's happening today is because we are living in bad form. So how do you create good form? How do you create form that is conventional to everybody? If I do, this joke of the funniest comedian, John Cleese. He made a film in America, Fish Named Wanda.
Oh, yes.
And he has a sketch, and you see him at the beginning of the sketch, and he's walking like this.
Yes.
And then he goes in, and it's a ministry of new walks.
Ministry of Silly Walks.
Silly walks.
Ministry of Silly Walks, yes.
And then somebody comes, and he does this to him, and he says, I want to make a patent on this walk. And he looks at him, and he says, we have it already, but maybe if you do this. and I said, my God, imagine if people started behaving like architects, they would be making a ministry of new walks.
So we are governed by the Architectural Ministry of Silly Walks, or the Ministry of Silly
But the funny thing is that after he changed his steps, he made it as an innovation. Talking of innovation, he said, okay, we'll make a patent because it's different from, whatever. And then, would you like a coffee, sir? Yes, thank you. Would you bring a coffee in? And the woman comes in with the tray, and she's having and you walk that she's training it, but she's not good at it. She spills the coffee at the guys. So that's all right.
There's a comment on functionalism, no doubt, I suppose, right?
This is how I see the situation.
Do you have an agreement with...
Funny forms.
Ministry of Funny Forms, okay.
Funny forms. Let's twist a building. Let's make a golf club into a building.
I'm fascinated by what you say about Norman Foster. Actually, I mean, do you have an agreement with him that you won't do office buildings if he won't do mosques?
I respect talent, but a lot of people who are in an academic field, they don't know the real world. They criticize sometimes my work and so on. They don't know. For example, when I was doing mosques in Medina, I'm dealing with the terrorist squad. And they come and they check the building to see where bombs can be placed. So I have to deal with this. Then I
Did you have to make changes in response to that?
to what?
To what they said? Did they require changes in the
Yeah,
design?
they require things, you know, because they were afraid of the Iranians bombing the Saudis, you know, Shias. And so at the time they were worried with Iran. Then there is another department, the department of what they call it in medieval times, at the time of the Inquisition, of good or bad behavior. So the women cannot go in the same entrance as the man. So they separate them, and they say the woman goes back there. So a man is taking his mother and his grandmother, old women, for the pilgrimage. So she goes at the back, and then there's a big crowd, he never finds her. And then they get me to solve a problem, to make a building and something, because they have a big land there, and it's called this land in Medina, the land of lost pilgrims. Because these old women never find. And then they throw them in the bus, a poor guy from India or from Pakistan or from Malaysia, and he never sees. So I went there and I saw children and little girls and women, and they never go back to their country. They're lost. And this is because these people, you know, women must not approach men as if we are in a boarding school or something. They were all this nonsense that never happened before today. And this is what happens to religion when it loses the sense of the sacred. It's what I call the secular religious, profane religious outlook, where you are concerned with stupid form and the way you cover your hair, the way you do this, instead of looking at the essence. And all this happens because when form is lost, people try to create any form. Okay, in times of experimentation, there is a breaking up of form. Like today, we have buildings twisted and this and so on. A breaking up of form. But form is constant. If you take, for example, this, and you look at it as a circle, in perspective, it looks as an ellipse, but you still know it's a circle. So it has a constancy. And the child develops this constancy. When he's young, he doesn't know. When Piaget did his test with children, and he got 2 balls of plasticine, and he'd ask a child, which is the heavier? He says the same. Then he does this one, like, which is the heavier now? And he says this, because he hasn't learned the preservation of mass. And there is the preservation water. He says, okay, draw this cup. Then he says, does this, draw it. He still draws the water like this. He hasn't discovered the horizon. And he went up in all, and of course he changed all the pedagogy and the Switzerland. He did great work, and Seymour Papert from MIT worked with him and developed logo language with his great mathematics, great man. Poor guy, he had an accident now, he's half paralyzed, but they developed fantastic work. But one thing that Piaget found out, the concept of volume could not be developed by the age of 15 in the development of intelligence. It was a gift.
You mean for some people it could never be done?
And that's why you have architects suffering with clients who cannot read plans. But it's not because they can't read plans, because there are, when I was doing my models with Kim Allen, poor guy, he died too. He used to be the best model maker in England, and he used to do Sir Basil Spence models. And he told me, from all the people, architects that came to me, the only 2 people who really know and are 3-dimensional in thinking is Sir Basil Spence and you. The others, he always picked their, because it's a gift. It's like the West, with all the beautiful music we have in the West, because I love classic music, Telemann, Vivaldi, whatever. It's my favorite music. And I think Germany produced some of the best music in the world, really. I mean, and it's calming and it's spiritual and everything. But when you look at it, for all the culture of Europe, it's only 50 musicians. How many musicians go every year to conservatoire? How many?
Thousands.
I mean, you
Yes,
have
thousands,
one
right.
talented today like Ennio Morricone, who produces this magical music for films. But basically, it's the same with architecture, and it scientifically, Piaget found out that people cannot have the concept of volume. People, and in architecture, if you have, for example, the linear 2, 1 becomes 2, and the 2 in square becomes 4, and in volume it becomes 8. So volumetrically, in 3 dimensions, the 1 goes into 8 by the cube. In the square, it goes by the 2. So when people do a mosque today and they have the columns, instead of being 2 meters, they go up to 10, the scale changes volumetrically. So they can't keep it that low and flat, 2-dimensional. This is the joke. And the way they mimic tradition. For example, Rasim Badran, I made a critic on his work in Riyadh. But of course, also the people that judge this work, who, I mean, I should keep my mouth shut sometimes.
No, but I presume that's not why he didn't come.
But the traditional architecture of Najd is you have 2 columns like this, and then you have 2 stones on corbelling columns here. And this is a very old technique before they discovered the arch. You corbel, and then you put the 2 big stones like this at 45 degrees. All right? The span of these columns is 2.5 meters. That means it's 2 prayer rows. So it's a distance like this, and the wood also, they didn't have wood, so the wood was around 2.5 meters. So they prayed 2 rows and the columns like that. Now, evolution happened. I have a picture of an arch I found in India. I was fascinated of it because I could see how they built that arch, but they didn't discover the voussoir. The voussoir was a great invention. The double-pointed arch is a great invention. It changed the whole architecture of the Gothic. But today you get students coming to me and they can't draw a 2-pointed arch. What are they teaching them at universities except a bit of your plan is constipated, it has to widen. I mean, it's all baloney talk. I mean, I really get annoyed with this because we lose a lot of money when we want to produce good work. We have to train these people for 2 years. They used to come in England and tell me from the Bartlett College, takes you, I said, I can't afford them anymore, the economy is going. They came even in Notre Dame and in Miami. They tell me, can you get work for students? I can't, the economy is gone, finished. But I said, please take them. I said, why do you insist? He said, because we get them as A students. They learn in 1 year more than what they learn in 5 years. Because they are dealing with reality. It's like in Miami, I was nasty to the students. And then Professor Hector came and said, listen, in America, we don't treat the students like this. You have to be nice to them. So I said...
Because they write the checks to pay your salary. So
yeah. So I went to the students next day, and I told them, okay, listen. I haven't been teaching for a while. I left the academic because I was a man who wanted to build. I'll tell you a story. My old mason, he was a dying man. So I told him, if you die, who's going to build for me? He was building, that's when the time I was in Egypt doing the houses, you know, like when I got there, Khanawat. And he said, I will teach you. They usually keep the secret of the trade, and they don't like architects, always. So he said, okay, he liked me. I said, I'll teach you. So I got up on the scaffold to learn how to build the dome. And he said, take off your architect's hat. I didn't have a head, but that's metaphorically speaking. I said, what do you mean? He said, here, if you make a mistake, I'm going to hit you with the hammer on your knuckles. And then I looked at him and I said, why is it like this? You craftsmen, they always, or hit the carpenter hits him with the piece of wood on the head, and you hit me on the knuckles. And why is it, do you have to be so violent to teach? I said, I tell you why. Because you, in architecture school, when you do a mistake, you get a rubber and you rub it. Here we do a mistake, both of us are down dead under the dome. So I told the students, what, do you want me to spoil you? I can't do that. I've been too much in the real life. Yeah.
Before we get into a full prescription to Dean Stern about how to reorganize the curriculum, let me ask you one other sort of broad question, which is...
I didn't mean that. He's putting it.
I mean, do you believe that our responses to form and space are universal? In other words,
yes.
Do people who grow up in an Islamic culture, people who grow up in an Asian culture, people who grow up in Western culture, all have the same response to these things?
When I did the first mosque on the island mosque, the Corniche mosque, and I did it very classical from the Gyushi. You saw the pictures of the old Gyushi on the Muqattam. And everybody was saying, what did he do? He did a very conventional. But I was there trying to, you know, the apprentice period, and then when you are going into tradition to learn the proportions, the dome, how it's built. I did the minaret, and the staircase was without concrete, was one arch on top of the other. They said you couldn't do it, and you know. So I was going through all this wonderful experience. And then Hassan Fathi at the time told me, when you finished it, did you feel the sense of the sacred in it? Did you feel that presence? That's very important. And I told him, I don't know, but I had critics come. I had an art critic, Swiss, who came, and people who came, foreigners, you know, came a lot at the time to Saudi Arabia for work. So they come and visit. They see something strange being built in. And then one told me, one art critic, very famous one, I can't remember the name, he said, you know, this is an economenic building. I said, what is economenic? I didn't know the word economenic. I don't know if I know it also now. But he said it can be a temple, can be a church, can be a mosque. It has reflected that which is beyond form. And this is what we try to do. That form is there to give us a message of what is transcendent. And you feel it sometimes in nature when you go and you have an experience. You can't explain this experience to someone. It's like somebody watching on TV roller coaster in a circus. You get in it and have a heart attack because you're in it. You're experiencing this G forces and so on. And I went into one once. I thought I was going to have a heart attack, but when I watch it in the movie, I see something, but you don't experience it. And traditional art is experienced, and that is why copying is not a shame, because there is stupid copying without knowing why a thing is done, and so you can twist the crescent, you can make like the haram. They have those minarets. Look at the old one, how beautiful. The new ones look stretched, because the old minarets followed the golden proportion, 1 to 0.6 to 0.6 of 0.6 and so on, or vice versa, 1 to 1.6 to... The new one, the divisions are the same. So it looks like it's stretched, because when you have a diminishing equation, if you look at plants, it is shooting towards, it's pointing. That's the whole idea of an arrow. Why is an arrow giving you that direction? You don't go in this direction. Because your eye is picking the lines much quicker as it comes to the point.
So is that responding to sacred geometry or just to the way the human eye works physically?
No,
physiologically.
everything that works in us
Mhm.
is attuned to the created world. We have two environments. We have the created world and we have the man-fashioned world. Now, we did a museum once, an exhibition that never happened, explaining what the created world is and the man-fashioned world. The man-fashioned world has to reflect the created world. And this is what the temple was all about. The dome was heaven. The square was earth, the cube. The transition between them is the world of the intermediate. We say, like in the Quran, we say God is what he has in heaven and earth and what is between heaven and earth. In Surah Taha, you have this. So you have this intermediate. What is the intermediate world? How does geometry express this? You have it expresses it in the cube. You have the cube of 1, you have the cube of 8, and then you have the cube of 64. How do you get the cube of 8? The 1 becomes 2, and then the 2 becomes 4. 4 by 4, 16 by 4, 64. And 64 is the world. And that is why you have the chess board, which is a sacred game, is 64 squares. So you come and tell me, what about the 3? Like the Fibonacci theories, you have.
Yeah.
What about the 3? It is the square of 9, the magic square of 9, and it is the cube of 27. So if 8 is the heavens, 64 is the earth, the cube of 3 is what is in between. It is the world of the archetypes. Now, if it is the world of the archetypes, then it's related to letters and numbers. So 27 are the alphabet of the Arabic. Sometimes they say it's 28, but it's the hamza above the alif, which can be the original one. And then when you say 1 to 7, what makes the first cube transition? The 1 cube, you add 7 to it, you get 8. So 7 is a sacred number. You have 7 days of the week. You have circumambulizing the, how do you say the word in English?
Circumnavigating?
The Kaaba in Mecca.
Okay.
My uncle used to ask me, why 7? You have 7. You have 7 going of Hagar.
Yeah.
You have 7 heavens. You have 7 gates of the city. So 7 is important because it takes 7 stages to complete a cycle in volumetric. So this is the secret of sacred geometry. What is a pentagon and what is a hexagon? If you look at Christian iconography, the pentagon belongs to heaven. You have the 5 star. And you have the hexagon belongs to earth. What's the relation with them? How did the sign of Christ come? Interlacing of 2 circles. And you have the root 3. And you have the Pisces.
Where do you get 5 from that? Because that's not a number you've discussed as sacred.
Pentagon.
No, I mean, you didn't previously discuss 5 as sacred.
5
okay.
is the figure that produces the ratio of the golden section.
Oh, right, okay.
Root 5. But all these, what's the difference between, why do you have 12 windows open? What is the intermediate stage between the dome and the cube? You have the openings. The openings are not put anywhere, they're put on the octagon. What is the octagon? You have in Greece the Tower of the Winds. What is the relationship of wind with the octagons? The wind is always related with spirit. So when a door opens like this, in our culture, and so on, say, oh, spirit came into the room. It's the wind. So the wind carries the spirits. So you have the 8 openings, which are the 8 angels carrying, carrying the throne of heaven. And the cube, when people say, oh, God created the earth in 6 days, the world in 6 days, and then rested on the 7th, or went back to the throne on the 7th. So the cube is what? It's the 6 faces. Left, right, up, down, And then the corners are 8, carrying the throne, which is the center. It's the same also in Christianity. You have the Sacred Heart, the three-dimensional cross, which is the cube is the extension of the cross. Anybody working with AutoCAD will know this, XYZ. And what you have in the center of the cross, you have the Sacred Heart. What is the Sacred Heart? It's the expanding and contracting. They call it in ancient Egypt the dancer, the heart, because it works to a beat. And if the beat is not there, it is dead. So the Sacred Heart is the creation of the whole earth of the life. So all these symbols in sacred architecture, you throw them away and then you get somebody to do a twisted waterfront mosque, and the steps were going one side and one side, and the words we use, abstract. What is this abstract thing? This abstract is an oversimplification. It's the great simplifiers that destroyed our culture. I had this thing and so on. We had one in Pakistan in the first Aga Khan war. And my mason, who was one eye and had prostate problems and wanted to go to the toilet, so he's pushing all the crowd, and we're behind the Aga Khan and Zia al-Haq and so on. And the architect had this bridge with water on each side. So the mason was pushing and didn't know that there was this in this pathway the water. He fell in the water. So the security thought a sniper was trying to get at Zia al-Haq and Aga Khan. And you have a big auditorium, and then you have this water. So, and mosque that's going, people are coming rushing, and they have to on stepping stones as if they're going through a pond. This is the problem with innovation when it's done just like that, and people.
When it's arbitrary and capricious.
People don't accept it.
Right.
They think that it should be there, and it messes the students, because not everybody is there. If they study Jean Piaget, they wouldn't do this. I tried to get Seymour Papert on the board of Prince of Wales, but they didn't want to change the system. And what you teach the architects is to be able to be part of a collective group that can do proper details, that can draw working drawings, that can do engineering.
Right.
But not just everybody wants to be an artist and then they go out, they can't do anything in the offices.
You know, it's fascinating because you've actually emphasized the conventional and the normative and the often frustrating realities of contemporary life along with the transcendent. Yeah. And it seems as if, in fact, your understanding is that the creation of great sacred architecture is not about removal from the present time or the transcendent, but about just finding a way to integrate.
It's a very difficult subject to deal with. We are really having a tough job here because it's a subject that needs concentration.
Right.
And today, according to TV people cannot keep their concentration level above 50 minutes. And these things need the concentration of hours and showing things and explaining things. And it's a very heavy subject.
Right.
This one of transcendence and sacred art.
And given that we are, in fact, above 50 minutes already, I do not want to strain our audience.
So I think everybody's leaving, we'll be talking to ourselves.
Thank you very much. This has actually been extraordinary. Thank you. This has been wonderful.
Setting my school back on track.
Thank you, Bob, thank you. Thank you.
And thank you, everyone, for spending these 2 days with us here. I want to thank Carla Britain. Everyone else has. And I, once again, want to do that as well for bringing this extraordinary group of people together and tackling challenging, important, and sometimes even controversial subjects. So I appreciate your coming here, and I hope that you will join us in a reception up in the gallery on the second floor, where we can study geometry in the perfect shape ever devised by man. It's called the martini glass. Thank you very much.